Joining us now is CBS News political director Steve Chaggaris. And Steve, as we wait for these two live events to take place, Senator McConnell speaking on Capitol Hill, Sean Spicer speaking at the White House, are you surprised to hear that this vote in the Senate is being delayed?
Not at all. I don't think it's a surprise that we were talking about this the last couple of days, and where is Mitch McConnell going to find the votes for this? As we're hearing some we're seeing some cracks in the foundation over the weekend with Republicans out there asking why are they moving so quickly on this, and then the CBO score comes out yesterday, and there were even more questions being raised within the Republican conference on the Senate side. I guess shouldn't be surprised by this. I want to go back to what you were just talking about with Nancy, and where is there an opening to potentially work with Democrats on this? I don't know if I actually see an opening anywhere. I mean, think about this. You have groups such as Club for Growth. You have groups such as Americans for Prosperity, the Koch brothers backed group. These are folks that are out there basically holding over Republicans' heads saying, you have promised for 7 years that you're going to repeal Obamacare, and anything less than that, we're going to hold you accountable for that. So there's big money behind Republicans repealing Obamacare, not just tweaking Obamacare, not just fixing it, but repealing it. So you start there. Then you have the years and years of animosity that has been built between Republicans and Democrats in this issue, with Republicans in the House voting to repeal, 40+ times, dozens of times voting to repeal, but then not going over in the Senate. Now that they have control of both, you think Democrats really are going to find a place to sit down with Republicans on this? I don't know, first of all, where that would begin, and secondly, whether the Republican base would even allow it. It's going to be such a show of opposition from the conservative side of the Republican Party if Republicans go down the road of trying to compromise and figure out a middle ground on this, especially, again, after years and years of campaigning on repealing Obamacare. In fact, the president himself had promised right before the election that the first thing he was going to do was repeal Obamacare. So I just think that that's going to be the main barrier for Republicans if they want to try to sit down with Democrats on this and figure out a way forward.
Okay, so how does Mitch McConnell spin this, Steve? We're going to hear from him in a couple of moments. He's talking to the country, but he's talking to his colleagues in the Senate. He's talking to the Republican base at home that voted these lawmakers to go and repeal and replace Obamacare, that voted for this president to oversee that process. What does he say that puts a sort of a happy face on this, at least for today?
Well, it's going to be really interesting to hear what the conservatives say, right? Where are they moving toward on this? Rand Paul has been a big no on this. And does McConnell come out and say that he is willing to sit down with them and work closer toward maybe closer to repeal than this would have originally been? But then where does that leave the moderates, right? So I don't know. He's got a delicate dance here. I think a lot of people were skeptical that there was even possible to get a vote this week on this, mainly because of how delicate this dance is. He goes one way, he goes toward the conservatives, he goes toward those groups that want full-on repeal, and he loses a number of moderates in that process. You try to placate the moderates and you lose the conservatives. So I'm anxious to hear what McConnell says at this news conference about what his plan is moving forward to try to get 50 votes just within the Republican conference. It's going to be a hard haul. We saw this on the House side, and on the House side they have a bigger majority, so it was a little bit easier, but not that much easier. They only passed it by one vote on the House side. I'm anxious to hear what McConnell has to say about all this.
And as far as what the White House says, I mean, we can almost anticipate it because we've heard from White House officials that if this doesn't work out, that they have other priorities, other things on the agenda that they're going to move on to, other things from the whiteboard behind Steve Bannon that they want to check off their list. And so they're going to start looking at infrastructure. They're going to start looking at tax reform, and they'll just let Obamacare die, which is what they say is happening to it anyway. Is that the likely scenario here, that the White House just sort of takes a step back and lets this process play out without being too involved going forward?
Well, if that does happen, and if they do fail to repeal and replace Obamacare, the question is how do Republican voters react to that in 2018? Again, after all the years of Republicans promising to repeal Obamacare, the fact that they failed to do it, if that happens, how much of an issue will that be in Republican primaries, I think most importantly, will there be conservative Republican candidates that come out and challenge incumbents and said you failed in Obamacare, or will they move on? Will this Congress and will the president have other legislative victories they can point toward, whether it's tax reform or tax cuts or infrastructure or you name it, then they can sort of move on from health care and not have any negative effects. That's the biggest question. And then there is some questioning that maybe if they do pass Obamacare repeal and replace, that could be a liability for them in 2018, because Democrats, no question, will use it against them in the midterms next year. We don't really know what effect health care will have on the midterms. So either way this goes, it'll be interesting to watch whether the failure of this, if it fails, will it be a problem within the Republican Party for them not keeping their promise, and frankly with American voters, or if they do go forward with this, how much of a negative effect will that have on Republicans in the midterms next year?
In the center of that scrum, for people looking at the left-hand side of the screen, is Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, one of those Republicans who has said that he's sort of on the fence. And I've been in touch with his office, Steve, this week, and he is really sort of buckling down with members of his staff, and they've been going through this bill, trying to find something that they could latch on to that would allow Senator Rubio to vote for it, but he had not committed up until this point. And now, of course, he doesn't have to because the vote has been delayed. But there is Senator Rubio, who had protesters outside of his offices here in South Florida yesterday, trying to get their voices heard and make their voices known that they did not want him voting in favor of this GOP health care bill in the Senate. You mentioned a little bit about Democrats, and I just want to go back to that because a lot of people have been looking at the Democrats and sort of criticizing them for not having a real coherent strategy in these first 5 months or so of the Trump administration. What is their calculus, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, as they watch this health care debate within the GOP play out and try to figure out what would be most advantageous for them going forward as they look ahead, as you've been talking about, to the midterms next year?
Democrats see this as an issue that if it goes forward, again, if the Republicans wind up repealing and replacing Obamacare, they see it as a winning issue for Democrats. They think that this is a horrible decision on the Republicans' part. They've been fighting this for years, and they think that if this does succeed, that they will be able to use this successfully against Republicans running for re-election next year in the midterms. And so you see them really sort of fanning the flames of the protests, trying to make a big deal about this and tell the American people how horrible of a decision this is. And then if it does work for the Republicans, then you use it against them next year. I think really just sort of standing on the sidelines and letting it happen is the way they're sort of dealing with this, gives them really an issue they feel is going to be a potent issue for them next year.